The midday sun beat down on the construction site as Karen pulled up in her gleaming SUV, her designer sunglasses perched atop her perfectly coiffed head. With a quick glance around, she spotted the towering crane that dominated the skyline. A mischievous grin spread across her face. This was the perfect opportunity to take the selfie that would make all her friends green with envy. Strutting past the harried workers, Karen made her way to the crane's control booth. "Excuse me," she called out, waving her perfectly manicured fingers. "I need to borrow this for a moment. It's an emergency." The crane operator, a weathered man named Joe, looked up from his console, eyes narrowed in confusion. "Ma'am, I can't just let you." "Oh, don't be silly," Karen interrupted, flashing him a dazzling smile. "This will only take a minute. I need to get the perfect shot for my social media." Before Joe could protest further, Karen had pushed him aside and settled herself in the operator's chair. Her fingers danced across the controls, and the crane's long arm began to move, swinging out over the construction site. "Hey, wait!" Joe shouted, but Karen paid him no mind, her focus solely on framing the perfect selfie. From her lofty perch, Karen snapped a series of poses, giggling to herself as she imagined the likes and comments that would soon flood her feed. But as she leaned out to get a better angle, the crane lurched suddenly, and Karen let out a startled shriek. Below, a group of construction workers stared up in horror as the crane's arm began to swing wildly, scattering debris and sending equipment crashing to the ground. Karen clung to the console, her knuckles turning white as she struggled to regain control. "Help!" she cried, her voice high-pitched and panicked. "Someone, please help me." Joe was already sprinting towards the control booth, his face a mask of concern. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the controls. You're going to hurt someone." But Karen refused to budge, her eyes wild with fear and determination. "No, I can't. I need to get the perfect shot." She pressed a button, and the crane's arm lurched again, sending a nearby scaffold tumbling to the ground. Chaos erupted on the construction site as workers scattered, narrowly avoiding the falling debris. Joe's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the extent of the danger Karen had unleashed. He had to stop her, no matter what. Adrenaline coursing through his veins, Joe rushed towards the control booth, his mind racing as he tried to figure out how to stop Karen's reckless rampage. As he approached the booth, he could see the terror and desperation etched on her face, her lips pressed in a tight, determined line. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the controls right now," Joe shouted, his voice stern and commanding. "You're putting everyone in danger." Karen's grip on the console tightened, her knuckles turning white. "No, I won't. I need to get the perfect shot for my Instagram." Her eyes darted around the site, frantically searching for the right angle. Joe knew he couldn't reason with her. Her sense of entitlement and single-minded focus on her social media presence had completely overshadowed any concern for the safety of the workers below. He had to act quickly before someone got seriously hurt. Swallowing his fear, Joe lunged towards the control booth, his hands reaching for the emergency stop switch. But just as his fingers brushed the button, Karen let out a piercing scream and swung the crane's arm towards him, narrowly missing his head. "Get away from me," she shrieked, her eyes wild with panic. "This is my moment, and you're not going to ruin it." Joe stumbled backwards, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he had to find a way to stop Karen, but the crane's erratic movements made it impossible to get close. Glancing around, he spotted a group of workers huddled behind a nearby barrier, their faces etched with terror. Thinking quickly, Joe waved them over. "We need to get everyone out of here now," he yelled. "This crane is out of control, and it's only a matter of time before someone gets seriously hurt." The workers sprang into action, sprinting across the site and ushering their colleagues to safety. Joe watched them go, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan to neutralize the situation. He couldn't let Karen's reckless actions endanger any more lives. As the crane swung back towards him, Joe braced himself, determination etched on his face. He had to find a way to stop Karen, no matter the cost. The construction site had descended into pandemonium, with workers scrambling to get to safety as the crane's arm continued to swing wildly. Karen, oblivious to the danger she had unleashed, remained glued to the controls, her fingers frantically tapping and twisting. Her eyes narrowed in concentration as she searched for the perfect selfie angle. Joe knew he had to act fast. The longer Karen remained in control of the crane, the more likely it was that someone would get seriously hurt. He scanned the area, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. Suddenly, an idea struck him. Turning to a group of workers who had gathered nearby, he shouted, "I need your help. We need to distract Karen and lure her away from the controls." The workers exchanged uncertain glances, their faces etched with fear. But how? One of them, a young man named Miguel, asked hesitantly. "That crane is completely out of control. We'd be putting ourselves in danger." Joe understood their apprehension, but he knew they had to try. "I know it's risky, but we can't let Karen keep putting everyone's lives at risk. We need to work together to stop her, no matter what." The workers looked at each other, weighing the risks. Finally, Miguel stepped forward, his expression resolute. "Okay, I'm in. What do you need us to do?" Joe's lips curved into a tight, determined smile. "All right, listen up. Here's the plan." As the workers scattered to carry out their roles, Joe took a deep breath and approached the control booth once more. Karen was still engrossed in her quest for the perfect selfie, oblivious to the chaos unfolding around her. "Ma'am, you need to stop this immediately," Joe shouted, his voice cutting through the din. "You're putting everyone in danger." Karen's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing in annoyance. "Didn't I tell you to leave me alone?" she spat. "This is my moment, and I won't let you ruin it." "But you're not just putting yourself at risk," Joe pressed on, his tone urgent. "There are workers down there who could get seriously hurt, or even killed, if you keep this up. You have to stop, for their sake, if not your own." Karen's brow furrowed, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. For a brief moment, Joe thought he might have gotten through to her. But then her eyes hardened, and she turned back to the controls. "I don't care," she said, her voice cold and unyielding. "This is my chance to be famous, and I'm not going to let anyone or anything stand in my way." Joe's heart sank as he realized that Karen was beyond reason. He had to act quickly before it was too late. As Karen's fingers danced across the crane's controls, the machine lurched and swayed, sending a fresh wave of panic through the construction site. Joe knew he had to act fast before someone got seriously hurt. Glancing around, he spotted a group of workers huddled behind a barrier, their faces etched with fear. Raising his hand, he gestured to them, his expression urgent. "I need your help," he called out. "We have to distract Karen and get her away from the controls." The workers exchanged uncertain glances, but one man, a burly foreman named Liam, stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "What do you need us to do?" Liam asked, his voice steady. Joe quickly explained his plan, and the workers sprang into action, quickly spreading out across the site. As they moved, Joe turned his attention back to the control booth, where Karen was still obliviously snapping selfies. "Ma'am, you need to stop this immediately," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "There are people down there who could get seriously hurt." Karen's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing in annoyance. "I told you, I don't care," she spat. "This is my moment, and I'm not going to let anyone ruin it." Before Joe could respond, a loud commotion erupted nearby, drawing Karen's attention. A group of workers were gathered around a piece of equipment, their shouts and laughter carrying across the site. Karen's brow furrowed as she watched the scene unfold. "What's going on over there?" she muttered, her fingers tightening on the controls. Seizing the opportunity, Joe called out, "It looks like they're having some kind of celebration. Maybe you should go check it out." Karen hesitated, her gaze shifting between the crane's controls and the group of workers. Finally, her curiosity got the better of her, and she began to swing the crane's arm towards the commotion. "Fine, I'll go see what all the fuss is about," she grumbled, her attention momentarily diverted from her quest for the perfect selfie. As the crane's arm moved, Joe let out a silent sigh of relief. The plan was working. Now he just had to keep Karen distracted long enough for the workers to get the situation under control. As the crane's arm swung towards the commotion, Karen's eyes narrowed in suspicion. Something didn't feel right. The workers were acting far too casual and carefree for a construction site that was currently in a state of panic. Hesitating, she glanced back towards the control booth, where Joe stood, his expression tense but hopeful. "What's going on over there?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. Joe fought to keep his expression neutral, his mind racing to come up with a plausible explanation. "It looks like they're just, taking a break," he said, his tone slightly too casual. "You know, trying to lighten the mood a bit after all this excitement." Karen's eyes narrowed further, and she turned her gaze back to the group of workers. They were still gathered around the equipment, their laughter and chatter echoing across the site. But as she watched, something caught her eye. A flash of movement, just out of the corner of her vision. Instantly, her suspicions were aroused. "Wait a minute," she muttered, her fingers tightening on the controls. "What are they up to?" Before Joe could react, Karen swung the crane's arm back towards the control booth, her expression determined. "I'm going to take a closer look," she declared, her voice brooking no argument. Joe's heart sank as he realized his distraction had failed. He had to think of something, and fast, before Karen realized the full extent of the workers' plan. "Ma'am, please, you need to stop this," he pleaded, his voice laced with desperation. "This is only going to end badly for everyone." But Karen was already lost in her own paranoia, her focus solely on uncovering the supposed deception unfolding before her. As the crane's arm swung closer, Joe braced himself, his mind racing to find a way to stop her. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught his eye. One of the workers, a young man named Miguel, was creeping closer to the control booth, his expression tense but determined. Joe's heart raced as he realized what the worker was planning, and he prayed that it would work. As the crane's arm swung closer to the control booth, Karen's eyes narrowed, her focus entirely on the group of workers she had spotted. Joe watched, his heart pounding, as Miguel slowly crept closer, his movements careful and calculated. Suddenly, a loud commotion erupted near the equipment, drawing Karen's attention. She whipped her head around, her grip tightening on the controls as she tried to get a better look. "What's going on over there?" she demanded, her voice laced with suspicion. Joe seized the opportunity, his mind racing. "It looks like there might be a problem with the equipment," he said, his tone purposefully concerned. "Maybe you should go check it out." Karen hesitated, her gaze shifting between the control booth and the group of workers. Joe held his breath, praying that his ruse would work. Finally, with a huff of irritation, Karen began to swing the crane's arm towards the commotion. "Fine, I'll go see what's going on," she grumbled, her attention momentarily diverted. As the crane's arm moved, Joe caught a glimpse of Miguel, who was now mere feet from the control booth. The young worker's expression was tense, but his movements were fluid and purposeful. Suddenly, Miguel lunged forward, his hands reaching towards the emergency stop button. Karen, sensing the movement, whirled around, her eyes widening in shock. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her voice piercing the chaos. Miguel didn't respond, his focus entirely on the task at hand. With a deft flick of his fingers, he pressed the emergency stop button, and the crane's movements ground to a halt. Karen let out a scream of rage, her hands clawing at the controls as she tried to regain control. But it was too late. The crane was no longer under her command. Joe watched, his heart pounding, as the workers swarmed the control booth, surrounding Karen and ensuring that she couldn't interfere with the crane's operation. The plan had worked, but he knew the true challenge was just beginning. As the crane's movements came to a sudden halt, Karen let out a scream of pure rage, her eyes wild with fury. She whirled around, her gaze landing on Miguel, who stood calmly by the controls, his expression resolute. "How dare you?" she shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'm going to have you fired, and then I'm going to sue this entire company for everything it's worth." Miguel didn't flinch, his gaze unwavering. "Ma'am, you need to calm down and step away from the controls," he said, his tone firm. "You've already put everyone in danger, and we can't let you do that again." Karen's lips curled into a snarl, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the palms of her hands. "Calm down," she spat. "I'll show you calm down." She turned towards the controls, her fingers clawing at the buttons and levers, but to her dismay, the crane remained motionless. Joe, who had been watching the scene unfold, stepped forward, his expression grim. "It's no use, Karen," he said, his voice low and controlled. "The crane is in lockdown mode, and we've already called the authorities. You're not going anywhere." Karen's eyes widened, the color draining from her face as the reality of her situation sank in. For the first time, she seemed to truly comprehend the gravity of her actions and the consequences that were about to unfold. "No, no, no," she wailed, her cries echoing across the construction site. "This can't be happening. I was just trying to get the perfect selfie, and now you're all ruining everything." The workers watched in stunned silence as Karen descended into a full-blown meltdown, her delusions of grandeur crumbling around her. It was a stark reminder of the entitlement and disregard for others that had driven her actions. As the sirens of approaching police and emergency vehicles pierced the air, Karen's panic only intensified. She knew that her reckless behavior had crossed a line, and the consequences were about to come crashing down on her. Joe and the workers stood their ground, unwilling to let Karen's tantrums or threats sway them. They had done what was necessary to stop her, and they were prepared to face the fallout, whatever it may be. As the wail of sirens drew closer, Karen's panic only intensified. She thrashed against the workers who had surrounded her, her eyes wild with fear and desperation. "You can't do this to me," she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm going to have all of you fired, and then I'm going to own this entire company." But the workers remained steadfast, their expressions a mix of resolve and pity. They had seen the destruction Karen's reckless actions had caused, and they were determined to ensure she faced the consequences. Moments later, a swarm of police officers and emergency responders flooded the construction site, their faces etched with concern. They quickly assessed the situation, their gazes shifting between the crane, the scattered debris, and the distraught woman at the center of it all. One of the officers, a gruff-looking man with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "All right, what's going on here?" he demanded, his voice brooking no argument. Joe stepped forward, his expression grim. "This woman took control of the crane and put everyone on site in danger," he explained, his voice steady. "We had to stop her before someone got seriously hurt." The officer's gaze shifted to Karen, who was now clinging to the console, her face a mask of pure terror. "Is this true?" he asked, his tone harsh. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. She knew that she had been caught red-handed, and the weight of her actions was finally sinking in. "Ma'am, you're under arrest," the officer said, his hand reaching for his handcuffs. "You're facing a long list of charges, including reckless endangerment, destruction of property, and interfering with a construction site." As the officer cuffed Karen's wrists, the woman let out a strangled sob, her facade of entitlement and privilege crumbling before everyone's eyes. The workers watched in silence, their expressions a mix of relief and a sense of somber justice. In the end, Karen's quest for the perfect selfie had cost her dearly. Her actions had put lives at risk, and she would now have to face the consequences of her reckless behavior. It was a stark reminder that even the most entitled and self-absorbed individuals are not immune to the consequences of their choices. As the police escorted Karen away, the construction site slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. But the memory of this day would linger, a testament to the dangers of unchecked entitlement and the importance of collective responsibility in keeping each other safe.